Now we welcome up Pastor Chuck Copeland of Hosanna Community Church and a longtime MoCoLMP member. We are so pleased that this is our second ceremony in Poolesville where Pastor Chuck has spoken. Pastor Chuck.
I've been living up here for 30 years, but I didn't grow up here. For several generations, starting probably with my grandfather's generation, my family did their level best to get away from here. And there was a reason for that. Today's gathering marks the culmination of many hours of preparation, presentations. And I got here a little bit of worry along the way, but for real, we had a lot of worry along the way. But here we are. Can we get a hand for all of the work that the people have done to get us to this place? This is historic. This is the first marker that has been placed for someone who have been lynched in Montgomery County. It's right there. This is a day that many in Poolesville thought would never come. I'm reminded of the first meeting that we had about this at the old town hall. There were some who believed that this would put a bad mark on this town as if this was the only one in Maryland who subjugated African Americans. After 1877, people began lynchings. And Maryland has its own special brand of injustice as it relates to race. See, Maryland is the South, whether you know it or not. Maryland was an occupied Confederate state. Yet many people are still surprised to hear of these atrocities. There's a lot of Confederate soldiers laying in these cemeteries around here. Some of them are related to me. You do the math. At the first meeting we had, people were worried. And I remember I had a conversation. Because like even here in Maryland, it gets away with calling their plantations farms. They like to call them farms. Even the professors like to call them farms. And on Friday, I was on a phone call and I corrected the professor. And I told her they weren't farms. Because if it's somewhere where the laborers are free labor and they working and ain't getting paid, that's a plantation. There were plantations in Maryland. And at that first meeting we had, I remember vividly a conversation that I had with Miss Gwen Reese, God rest her soul, the co-founder of the Sugarland Ethno-History Project. And I told her, I said, Miss Gwen, I told her that evening, I wasn't sure how many friends I would have left in Poolesville after this. And she got a good laugh out of that. And later, before she passed away, she told me, she said, Chucky, it's your job to speak for them. And that's why I'm standing here today. And I don't care about nobody up here in the Ag Reserve clutching their pearls. Because what happened here is the truth. And it's time out for us trying to look the other way. We're going to tell this story. And I'm going to tell y'all, my ancestors that were here, I never heard about no George Peck. I never heard about anybody being lynched up here. And it wasn't because the African Americans and the white people didn't know about it. It was because the African Americans were terrorized and they were afraid. And they didn't want to pass that trauma on to their children. Here we are. So for the rest of my life, I will speak for my ancestors. I will speak to those cowards who lynched George Washington Peck. I know that this wasn't the first person that was lynched up here. See, I live on property that's been in my family since 1877, when the protections went off of black people. Because, see, when we were enslaved, we weren't being lynched because we were worth something. See, if you was a problem on the plantation, they would sell you south. They had to get something out of it. They wasn't going to kill you. Let me get back to my notes. I ain't got but 5 minutes. They knew what they were doing. They had done it before. It just had never been documented. The 3 that we're talking about are just the 3 that have been documented. I want y'all to hold on to that. And let me tell you something. One man was hung right there in Rockville on the 4th of July. It was a party. Hold on to that, because that happened in Montgomery County. People, man, I've had people walk up to me, I didn't know that Maryland had plantations. What? The two most famous slaves in history is Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass. Where are they from? I'll wait. The dude that said that we were 3/5 of a human being is laying right up there in the middle of Frederick beside his mama, Chief Justice Roger Taney. They just took his statue down from in front of that state house down there in Annapolis when George Peck was killed. George Floyd, another George, was killed on television. It shouldn't take incidents like this for us to understand this situation of injustice in the United States of America. Those people that lynched George Washington Peck wanted to send a message to the community. So those white men from this ag reserve tortured and hung George. And they left him hanging in a tree in the middle of town, and they were not ashamed. Their ancestors that are still around, they're ashamed. They don't want us to talk about it. Get over it. That incident represented the ideology that still exists in more hidden forms today. White supremacy. I'm going to call it what it is, because my ancestors couldn't call it out. It was okay to leave George Peck hanging over there for people to see, because the message to the African American community up here was clear. Overstep your bounds and you be in a tree too. My mother's grandfather was a young man living in Dickinson when that man was hung. He was 18 years old. He was a few years younger than George. I often wonder what the conversations were like around the family dinner table that night. See, I live on the property that they lived on in 1877, 1880, when he was hung. And I think of many a day, every household, every African-American household up here was scared out of their wits. I'm sure that my great-granddaddy, Otho Thompson, and his brother Charles, who was the same age as George, were scared out of their wits. Imagine the terror from the families, because they put all of the African Americans, they pushed them out of Poolesville. That's why when you see all our little places of Sugar Land and Montsburg and Mount Ephraim and Jerusalem, it's outside of town. So we came in town to do our business, and we was right back out of town. Imagine being an African American after you heard about that man hanging in that tree, left there on Sunday morning. These fair folks came here and was like, oh boy. It sent a message. And see, I'm a descendant, man, of all of these folks from up here. On both sides of my family. I tell people all the time, I got DNA in the black and white cemeteries up here. Yeah, and I went to find some of them. Here's what I want you guys to understand. This terror lynching happened for a reason. And it happened to continue to keep people in their place. Think about what people told their children. Black and white. You think them people in this Presbyterian church wasn't walking in there without their kids that morning? The kids saw it too. It's an African-American church right down the street there. And they said them folks came up here and cut that man down. And word is he's buried back there. I'm going to let y'all know something, okay? If that man did what them people wrote down in that story, them people from Elijah United Methodist Church at the time, Colored Methodist Episcopal, would not have come over here and took that man and put him behind their church, because that would have put them in harm's way. So I say all that to say there ain't nowhere you can go in Berlin without seeing a house with a marker showing you where the Jewish family was ripped out and taken to a concentration camp. You can't go nowhere without seeing a marker by the houses. Why? Because they didn't want to repeat it and they didn't want to forget it. They acknowledged it. The United States of America takes Confederates and put them up on a pedestal. It's time out for that. It's time out for that. What those people were willing to stand up, okay, and literally lose their life for, take up arms and lose their life to keep my ancestors enslaved. That's what the Confederacy represents to me. So listen, we got a long way to go. But I've had 3 children graduate from that high school over there. I worked in that high school over there. I'm a pastor in this town. And guess what? It's more white people in my church than brown people. Right here in Poolesville. Because it's about love and coming together. We ain't trying to make nobody feel bad. But listen, we want you to acknowledge our trauma. Don't act like it didn't happen. You need to know, this black man with this big bald head is telling you. Don't act like it didn't happen. Just because you act like it didn't happen doesn't mean it didn't happen. And I'm going to say one more thing, and I'm going to sit down because I know I'm over my time. But what I want to say is this. The author, Toni Morrison, calls the power of the white media and how they influence what people do and how they write and how they communicate. She calls it the white gaze. Like if you look in the paper and you read it and you trust the person that read it, that makes it true. Okay? So these stories that were placed in the paper, how these accounts that were told were written by some of the people that was responsible for what happened to the young man. So we don't know the truth. I'm not saying he didn't do it, but we don't know the truth. And whatever he did, his rights were not honored. So this day is an amazing day. I'm so happy and grateful to be here and stand in front of you. And what I want you guys to understand is, listen, I want to go back to what the question that these people were asking, that what they said to the kids, right? Now, I'm sure the African-American parents kind of didn't even want to address it. They probably act like it didn't happen. Didn't want to talk about it. But I bet you, just to protect the race, a lot of them white parents said, you know, he probably deserved it. And guess what? A few years back, when we watched that police officer kneel on that man's neck, calling for his mama until he died, there's a whole lot of people in this country that said he probably deserved it. It's the same ideology. And that's why we got to tell the truth. And that's why we can't let this go by. Remembering is resistance. I'm not trying to be violent, but I'm speaking for my ancestors. I'm not trying to be angry, but I am speaking for my ancestors because they walked through this place for over 200 and something years with no rights. Miss Tina sitting right there said the police officer told her, you better get out of here. You better leave here before it gets dark. The cop told her that when she was a little girl. Okay? Let me tell y'all something. Slavery wasn't that long ago. These people sitting here, she went to school with my mom and daddy. My mother's birthday is today. She turned 84 years old today. Reverend Glenn right there went to school with my daddy. These people, listen, they can tell you stories. I'm just repeating what I heard. But I'm going to tell you something. Montgomery County should be commended. Poolesville, the town of Poolesville, should be commended. Y'all hear me? I love my town. All right? I love my town. God planted my feet here. I've been here for 30 years. I hated Poolesville growing up. I grew in Rockville. I grew up in Rockville. I didn't want to come up here for anything. And I never thought I would live here. But I'm so grateful to have this opportunity to bring reconciliation, taking that which is broken and putting it back together again. That's my job as a pastor. That's my job. And I want to do that with this community. Because whether y'all know it or not, until we deal with the blood, the sweat, and the tears that's in the ground up here, we're not going to get the healing and reconciliation that we're looking for. So my prayer is that we will just begin to continue to work together to illuminate this history. I told Jim Brown and them, I said, Poolesville hangs his hat on history. You know, they can tell me how many nose hairs John Poole got, but don't nobody talk about the enslaved Africans that he owned. They had names. They on this ledger over there somewhere, but we don't know nothing about them. It's time out for that. We were here, and guess what, y'all? I'm going to speak for them. May God bless y'all. In the name of Jesus. God bless the soul of George Peck.